Hello, my name is Erxandale. You can call me Alex. I'm gonna teach you everything that you're gonna need to know if you want to use particular. Now, if you don't know what particular is, it's basically like a plugin to create like particle effects and a lot of things. And I'm gonna teach you as much as I can because I don't really know everything about it, but hopefully I know enough to help you with this tutorial kind of thing. And this is not going to be like a tutorial where you have to like follow along or anything like that. This is going to be like explaining to you how everything works and how you're supposed to use it. So yeah, let's get it started. All right, so how do you get particular? First, you need to create a new solid. You can name it whatever you want. I'll name it particular. And if you have Trapcode installed, which is the plugin, just type in particular and drag this here where it says RG Trapcode and drag it to your solid. Right? So now you'll get this on your effects tab, and you have all of these settings which I'll explain to you later. But first, if you, I think it's really important to know how the designer works, because this is going to show you how to customize your particles to the fullest, right? So we'll jump straight into the designer, and now you have this separate window, which might sorry, it's my phone. You have this separate window which is might be overwhelming for some of you, but it's really useful and helps me at least in a lot of ways. So I'm going to show you what everything does. So first is the emitter type. This is the origin of where your particles are going to be emitting, or where it's going to be growing from, and you can like this will like show you of what type of particles you're looking for. Like this is like the base of it, right? So you have all of these right here. Now, if I switch to one of these, they all look the same, but that's because it's all moving, right? So I'm just gonna go to the motion right here, switch off the velocity, which is the speed of the particles. So now nothing's happening, but that's because it's point. It means the particle is just a point. It's a single point in the center of wherever it is. Box turns it into like a box, right? Particles are randomized depending on where the box is. Sphere, it's a sphere. You got a grid, which is grid, and light. Light is something you would want to use if you wanted to follow a path. So, for example, if I wanted a trail following across the screen, I would need to use a light, and I would need to keyframe the light, and then that particle will actually follow the light, and I can demonstrate that to you later. Layer is something that you would need to use not in the designer, but you should use it like outside, which is over here, which I'll also get to later. And what basically does is it projects an image or a video onto particles. Now, OBJ model is something where you can import 3D objects as particle effects. So if this works, yeah, here, a gun, if you could see right here. This gun is the particle effects and stuff, and you can do like a lot of cool stuff with it. And this thing just crashed. And text to mask is where you can just apply a text into particles, and you can choose whatever font. And also same with masks, which is really cool. So that's the emitter type. Next is the emitter behavior. So for example, I'm going to switch this back onto 100, which is the default speed. You open particular. So you could see that this is as many particles as we're getting. But let's say that I want a lot more. So if I switch to 1,000, now I have 1,000 particles. And you have this thing called continuous and explode, and from emitter speed. Now, I do not know what the emitter speed does. I haven't really messed around with it. Maybe you can go discover for yourself on what that does. But this continuous basically means that it won't stop emitting, and explode means it'll explode once. It'll just emit once. And this is useful to make like explosions or fireworks, if that's what you're looking for, right? All of these other settings right here are pretty much depending on what your emitter type is. So if I have a grid emitter right here, you could see, in depending on which axis you're looking for. So yeah, that's some cool stuff right there. Just back to 100. Alright, so, and last one would be the position, which is basically changing the position of where your base particles are. So you can do like, just, you know, if you don't want it in the center, you can just put it on the corner or something like that. For this positioning subframe, I actually have no idea what this does either. So maybe you can tell me what that does if you discover yourself. Next is motion. This is going to change the velocity or the speed of how your particles work. So for example, right here you have direction. You can turn it to like, change it to bidirectional, and you could see it, nothing has really changed, but if I rotate it around, you could see that it's going to one direction. Direction spread is basically how much it spreads. So it won't work with uniform, it'll work with directional. So if I mess with this, right, you can't really see anything, but if I turn it around, you could see that the higher I put the value, the more it spreads. So this is like pretty self-explanatory, this directional spread. You have this one called seed over here, which is going to change the phase, which basically changes the randomization. And this one, which I showed earlier, is pretty much the rotation of where the particles are being shot at. Velocity is pretty much the speed of it. I'm gonna change this to 200 real quick. And you have this thing called the velocity random. Now if I put this to 0, all the particles are moving at the same speed, but if I put it to 100, all the particles, each of them are moving at different types of speeds. You might want to use this if you're gonna have like, you know, like let's say snow or something like that. You can use this, is basically randomizing the velocity of how all the particles are moving. Velocity distribution and velocity for motion, I also have not messed around with this much yet, but I haven't really had a problem where I had to use it, so I don't think it's necessary, at least for now. Okay, so particle type is basically how your particle looks like. You can also edit life here, and if you don't know what life is, it's the value of how long each particle lives. So for example, over here, if it says 3 seconds, it means that each particle lives for about 3 seconds. If I change it to 5, it means the radius is bigger, but that's because each particle gets to live on for 5 seconds. Next here, life random, like a randomization of each particle depending on its life length. So if I put it to 100, anything between 0 and 5 is each particle, it doesn't go above that. So you could see particles are disappearing in between before the end of this radius right here. That is what particle random does. Particle feather is if you want to like smoothen the edges of your particles. So a good way to explain this, if I go to the size and rotation, which I'll get to next. So if I go to particle feather, you could see, if as I'm scrolling this up and down, 0 means all the particles have like sharp edges, which means like a full-on circle, but feather makes it look like it's like glowing a bit or something. It has like, you know, like a feathered edge. That is what it's doing. Put it back to like 5. So particle type is where you can change like how your particle looks like, which is pretty cool. So you can change it into like a glow, which you don't really which is pretty much, I would say, useless, because you can just use the default glow in After Effects. You have star, which basically turns it into stars, so that's cool. Now cloudlet is if you want to make clouds and stuff. This is the most heavy, most powerful particle type. Straightlet, I think it's similar to the clouds, except it's I haven't really messed around with it. I think it's just the clouds, but it's just much smaller. But I don't know, you can mess with that for yourself. Now the sprite is basically if you want your particles to be like an image. So you can have all of these presets over here, but again you can use your own. So I'm gonna go down over here, and I'm gonna go over here to this. Please don't kill me for using this as an example, but you could see here I have all of these emojis as particle effects, right? So yeah, you could do stuff like that, like make your like whatever into particle effects. You can have also colorize, where you can basically color them and like tint them a bit. I'll get to that later, how to work on colors, because colorize works with this color tab over here. And then fill is basically like it just makes all the particles one separate flat color, and you could just use the color tab to change it. Sprite, textured polygon, textured colorize, and textured fill. I think it's something similar, but I haven't really messed with it much. Now what Square does is, Square is literally just making it into like square particles, which is, you know, cool if you want to have like some 8-bit or pixel type particles. And then you have the circle, the final one, which is, I would say, pretty useless too, because you have the sphere and they're pretty much both the same. And also, if you're wondering what no DOF means, it means no depth of field. It means that it won't work when you use the camera depth of field, if you know what that is. If you don't know what depth of field is, it's basically where you can blur the foreground and the background and focus on one specific area between the background and foreground. So this is to imitate like realistic cameras and stuff. So next is the size and the rotation. Size basically is, well, the size of the particles. You can change the size random. Basically randomizes the size of the particles. Aspect ratio, this is the resolution. Now there's this other one called the curve, right? There's this curve. Now you might be wondering why that curve is there, and you can see that there's this size and start, time, end right here, and this is basically determining of this what's the size of the particles from the start of its life till the end of its life. So let me go to one of these pieces over here and click this. Now you can see, right, over here it means that the size over here, which would be this area over here, which means it'll be the biggest as it can be, and from the start until the end it will start shrinking. So if I play it now, you can see that the particles are slowly fading away because of its size. So this is really cool if you don't want it to just suddenly just disappear out of nowhere, right? There's a lot of cool presets here, or you can just mess around yourself, and you can also randomize it and get some really cool different effects. So yeah, that's size. I haven't really messed around with these two, but from what I'm guessing, this is basically randomizing the rotation and changing the rotation of each particle. Now opacity is basically changing the transparency. If I change this to 0, you can see that particles are not shrinking, but instead they're like actually like fading away. And this is basically changing the opacity of the particles. Opacity random is where it changes the transparency value of each individual particle. And curves work the same way. Basically changes the opacity depending on the life. So you could see on the end, instead of shrinking, it's actually like fading away. Right. So next is the color. This is basically changing the color of your particles. You can have them all as whatever color you want. Let's say I can have a blue, I can have a green, and let's say you don't want it to have it as one color. You can actually go to the random over here and make it look like sprinkles or whatever. But let's say you're looking for something a bit more specific. This is where these come in. You have over life and random from gradient, which I'll show later. So over life is the color depending on the life of the particles. So from left to right, it's start to end. So you could see, let's say I change these values. Also have these presets that you can mess around with right over here. So you can see as it goes to from the start, which is the middle, it's blue, and from the end it turns green and then dark blue. And you can just mess around with these and get you can get like fireworks with this, or like some rocket explosion or something. And if you want to customize it, you can actually, if you hold these and pull it down, it will remove the tabs, and you can also double click and it will, or click, right, and it will give you the tab for you, and you could customize whatever color you want. So for example, I can pull these down. From the start, I want to double click red, and then from the middle it turns like yellow or orange. and then it turns like whitish yellow, and now have like some weird looking explosion kind of effect or something. But you get the idea, right? Now next is random over gradient. This is basically color random, except it's basically random over this gradient over here. So whatever color is over here, that's the only color that will be emitted on this thing. Now light from emitter, my guess is it's dependent on the light. I haven't messed around with this either. I always use overlight. Next is shadow outlets. I'm gonna change this back to at start and change this back to white to explain to you of how this works. Alright. Whoa. So I'm gonna increase the size over here, which is the size tab, and to show you on what this does, I'm also increase the feather a bit. So let's say there's too much particles and I cannot see what depth is there. Now you have these two called, I don't really mess with these are kind of broken, I guess, or maybe I'm just stupid, but I mess with these two, which is shadow outlet for main and shadow outlet for aux, and aux is something that I'll also get into later. So shadow outlet for main is basically giving your particles a drop shadow. And this is useful if you want it to look like it's actually like three-dimensional. You can edit the strength here, which I don't really mess around with much. The opacity, which is the transparency, adjust the size, the distance, which is, you know, how much depth you want inside those particles. You want like barely any depth, or you want like a lot of depth, and you know, you mess around with these values. And aux is basically like the same thing except for the Aux system, which I'll again get to later. Next is gravity. Now gravity is basically self-explanatory. You can pretty much add gravity to your particles. So you want to have like rain or like a fountain or something, you use particular for this, which is pretty cool. Next is the physics time factor. This is pretty much the duration of the particle. So if I increase this really high, you can see that it's really fast. If I put it to 0.1, you could see that the particles are really slow. This is like the time scale of the particles and how they're moving. Right. Alright, so next is the physics. Now this one is a bit where you can like manipulate and of how the particles are moving. So for example, I don't like how it's all going at a constant speed in straight direction. Turbulence, if I up this affect position, it's moving left to right a bit and stuff like that. So that's what it's doing. But I'll go from bottom, top to bottom. So air resistance is pretty much like what it is, or air resistance. So it's gonna just slow down the particles and stuff like that. But it's to 1. You can see that the particles it's fast in the middle, but then it starts to slow down as it starts, you know, going on because of air resistance. So you have all of these spin amplitudes and frequencies. This is basically something similar to turbulent position, which I'll get to. And frequency, which is how many times it starts spinning and going crazy. Wind X, wind Y, and wind Z is basically the direction of, you know, wind. So I wanted to, let's say I wanted to move on to the right, but I also wanted to make it maybe fly a little bit, or move it up. You can just change the wind of how the particles are, you know, going. So which is useful if you want to make like, you know, dust or whatever. Now I won't be able to explain everything here, but I'll explain the ones that I do know. Turbulent size is basically the size, you know, it changes the size over time. So you can see the size is going up and down, like big and small as it's being emitted. Some interesting effects. And position is basically randomizing the position. You can make them move around and stuff, which is cool. All you really need to know is you just need to mess with size and position, but if you want to customize it further, you use these values over here. Right? Fluid and bounce. I forgot to mention this. What fluid does in the physics model is it basically makes it, well, fluid. So I'm going to change this to a box to make it explain it to you a bit better. I apologize, I forgot. Alright, so fluid. You can see that the particles are moving in a much more weird way. It's more like it's actually like acting like it's smoke or liquid. That is what fluid does. You can change the force region size. Is the field of what particles are being emitted, and you can then change the buoyancy or buoyancy, that's however you pronounce it. That is the strength of the field. Put this to 0, nothing is happening. Put this to 50, now it's getting pushed a lot. You can change the random swirl to change like of how it's moving, because it's just going straight up. Put this to like 25 something, and now you could see that the particles are actually moving like a bit more out. We'll change it to 100 maybe. See, and you could see that it's moving out. You also have in the fluid force, you have all of these multiple settings right here, which is different fluid types. So a vortex ring, basically instead of pushing it in a box, you're pushing it on a tube. So this tube, it's showing you the direction of how the particles are being pushed. So let me get this camera real quick, and you could see that the particles, you know, are being pushed from the center over here, and it's being spun on this tube right here. And you can mess around with this. Core size is basically the size of, you know, what's inside, but you know, this turns down the strength of the circle. And the strength is basically, well, the strength of how much is being pushed. Tilt is, you know, if you want to change the direction of where it's going, which is cool, you can mess around with that. Finally, you have vortex tube, and this is something if you were to make your particles spin around. So I'm going to change this values to 0 back again. So let's say you want to make a tornado, right? You use a vortex tube, and you could create like this cool tornado effect and stuff like that, which is cool. So that is fluid force. Now there's some extra ones over here, and I can explain to you what viscosity and time factor is, but I don't know what simulation fidelity is. I haven't really messed with that. I'm yet to learn it. So fluid time factor is like gravity. It's the time scale of the fluid simulation, the animation. That's what it's doing, right? But it's to point 2. You could see it's moving much slower. Now what viscosity does is, for example, it basically changes. It controls of how fluid your particles are. So to give an idea of how viscosity works, let's say you compare water and ketchup, and if you were to drop them on the floor, the ketchup would keep its form while the water will lose its form, and it'll just spread around everywhere. But for the ketchup's case, before it does that, it has to just, you know, it keeps its form before it actually like starts spreading around. That is what viscosity is. I don't know, you might find it useful. Let's say you want to change of how your smoke moves and stuff like that. You can use viscosity. Next up is spherical field. Now what spherical field does is basically like it adds like a sphere in the middle. You can like change the radius, change the feather. It just basically adds like some force field in the middle. Now in like others more advanced plugins and like different software, like let's say X particles, or for example if you were to use Stardust, you have more options just than to use like a sphere. You can use like a box or in like an OBJ or a disk or whatever. You know, this is to create like this would be mostly used for like some sci-fi effects or some magic kind of effects and stuff like that. So the Aux system, what the Aux system does is it basically adds trails. So if I go to emit over here and change it to continuously, you can see that my particle now has trails. So you can like create. This is how you. This is one of the most used. One of the more used effects. But this really adds a lot of cool stuff to your particles. Next is your particle life, and this is basically the rest of the settings here are pretty much the same as the normal part as these over here, except it's for the Aux system, because the Auxes are also particles. The trails are also particles. So if I put this higher, right, particle life. Now you can see there's more trails. I can change the feather. I can change the size. Same thing, size over life. You could do that too. Now all the trails have like sharp ends and stuff like that. You can do the same with opacity, randomize whatever, and of course you got color over life, which is really cool. And you can randomize this a bit, and you can see that I can have some really interesting effects. Now, of course, this might not look, pleasing. It's just going straight. You also have turbulent position. You can make all the particles, look like this and have some really cool effects. All right. So what I like to do with particular is I like to combine it with the physics tab, and I can get like some really interesting effects. And I can also, I mess around with these physics tabs and these physics tabs, and I can really create some really weird stuff. uh, so you can really create like a bunch of stuff here. Now, if you have trouble picking or starting off, and you have no idea what you want to start with, you have all of these presets over here. If you go in the top left corner, presets, and you can actually go over here and choose whatever presets that you like. You even got the fluid ones right here, and this will actually help if you want to like learn of how to make different kinds of stuff, or you can just use these presets. You got a lot of cool stuff. So like I can go to explosions, and you got all of this awesome stuff. And you have this other tab over here called multiple system presets, and this is a bit more advanced. Now what this does is, you see that I only have this emitter right here. You can add multiple systems and multiple emitters onto your layer. Let's say, oh, I want this one to be like have like a much bigger size, and I also want it to be my mouse disappeared. All right, and I also want it to be blue. So you can have like a bunch of different combinations, and that's what multi-system is. So for example, if I were to go over, let's see here, duotone zoom, you could see that these are, there are different particles going on. You only need to use this if you're going for something that's like something a bit more advanced, but it also is heavier. So now for these settings right here, and I said I was gonna show you on what light and layer does, right? I'm gonna take this off right here. Right. Now I'm going to change this to a point light. It's much better that way. All right. So I'm gonna go click P, and I'm gonna center this 540 and 960, which is the comp, and I'm going to move it from left to right. So over here, from over here, the x-axis, which is this value on the left. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go over here a few seconds ahead, and I'm gonna move it ahead like this. Now you can see nothing is happening, but the light is moving. Now what you want to do is you want to change this emitter type from point to lights. Right? Now the particle is not going to do anything yet because you have to choose its name, right? So what this means is, for example, it says light emitter name starts with emitter. So I can, whatever starts with emitter, whatever layer starts with emitter, whatever light object, it will follow, right? So let's say I want to name this as, you could keep it as it is, but let's say you named it something else, right? It's named emitter, so if I name this emitter, now it's following. Now the reason why this is a thing is, let's say you have multiple particles and you want each particle to behave differently, right? You don't want all of them to follow the same light, and you have like, let's say, multiple lights, and you want it all, to all different types of particles to follow specific lights. That's why you would have to name it. So yeah, this is emitter. I use this a lot. I can show you one of the effects that I create. So what I like to do is I like to go to the velocity. I'll go to the particle here. Right. Some of the settings here are actually they're similar, but if you want to find something, they're not in tabs. They're like all of these little drop down menus, and you might want to mess around. You might want to find out what you're looking for. So I like to you know, do stuff like this and create some cool stuff. Emitter size, I can change to 0. It's cool. So here is how I would use lights. This is, you can follow along if you want. So I have my normal emitter, I have the light. Let's see, particles per second. I don't really need to increase that. Changes to 0. Right. So let's say I have this particle thingy. I can go to the particle size. Particles per second. I can change the size to 5, and then I can have like a turbulence field on the air. Turbulence field. I can change the position, and then I can actually add an Aux system as to continuously, and then I can have this size at 1, 5 per second at 3, but I can have more particle effects. And now I have this weird string effect, as you could see here. You can create a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, that is particular. Now, that is how lights work. Alright, so I actually try to use the layered thing, but the problem is that, okay, I've not used it before, but if I go to Trapcode form, which I'll get to in another video, thought I probably know how I thought I knew how to do it, but I didn't. So yeah, yeah. So that's it's pretty. All of these settings are pretty much the same. They're just placed in different areas. World transform is just the position of the whole layer. So, you know, here is where you change the position. You can move it forward, you can move it forward and backward and all of that stuff. So yeah, you don't want to change it on this position right here at the bottom. You want to change it over here. That's the proper way of doing it. Visibility, now this is if you wanted to like have fog. So I made this video a while back called Guardians, and I used a lot of like fog using this depth map. So what it's doing is it's actually like fading the background out. It's not like blurring it or anything. It's actually like making it fade away. So this is what it's kind of doing. This is how the visibility works in particles. Rendering is you know how like the final render basically. By default, it's on motion. It's on full render, which is the final result. Motion previous if you wanted to preview faster, if you want to see how the physics works and stuff like that. Acceleration is, you know, depending if you want it to be working on your CPU, like if you wanted it to be using its CPU or the GPU, and you know, depend if you have a graphics card, go with a GPU. You can also change the overall particle amount. So let's say, oh, you know, you like how many particles are there. You don't want to change anything, but you do want to reduce the amount of particles. Change it to this right here, particle amount. You can also increase it. You also have depth of field, camera settings, and camera settings is the default, but if it's not, just change it, and you can have your depth of field. And this is where, you know, the DOF comes in. I'm not going to show you on how to use the camera, but you know, this might be useful. And you have all of these other settings over here. So yeah, that is how you use Trapcode particular. I will make a tutorial on how to use Trapcode form, which is pretty much like, it's similar to particular, but it's not the same. So I hope this helped, and if you like my other videos, maybe leave a like, subscribe or some shit like that. Yeah. So yeah, goodbye.